too much noise today. I just need the road, the rain, and the hum of the engine.
Have you ever felt like there's a part of you don't really understand? Like, you're not sure who you really are anymore? I've been there too. Let me share something with you. Maybe it'll help you see things a little clearer. There was a time in my life when I thought I had all the answers. Not in an arrogant, loud way. At least, I didn't think so. But I carry myself like someone who had it figured out. I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen. I didn't pause. I spoke with certainty even when, deep down, I was unsure. I wore confidence like a mask, hoping no one would see how scared I was to be wrong. I think back to those years, and it's like watching someone else. A younger version of me who confused knowledge with wisdom, and who thought being right was more important than being open. The truth is, I was terrified. Terrified that if I ever admitted I didn't know something, people would stop respecting me. That if I questioned myself, everything would unravel. I didn't realize I was building my identity out of fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of appearing weak. So I clung to this rigid version of myself, defended it like a fortress. And for a while, it worked. People listened. Some admired the certainty. But slowly, something began to crack. It wasn't loud. It didn't happen overnight. It was in the little moments when someone gave me honest feedback and I instantly shut down. Or when I dismissed another point of view with sarcasm, not curiosity. I remember once a close friend tried to tell me that I was getting in my own way, that my inability to listen was hurting the people around me. I laughed it off, said something clever to change the subject. But that moment haunted me, because somewhere inside, I knew they were right. I just didn't know how to handle it. What I've come to understand is that ignorance doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It hides behind cleverness, behind polished words, behind a smirk that says, I already know. But the cost is high. When you stop listening, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, you stop growing. That was me, stuck in a loop of my own making. I thought I was in control, but I was being led by fear. And the saddest part? I didn't even know it. I was so wrapped up in protecting this image of being smart, of being strong, that I didn't notice how isolated I was becoming. People pulled away. Conversations became shallow. Trust started to evaporate. And I couldn't figure out why. Looking back, I see it now. When you act like you know everything, you don't give people space to show up as themselves. You silence their voice. You shut down their wisdom. And eventually they stop trying. The turning point for me came on a quiet night, sitting alone after yet another falling out, one of many that year. I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally worn. And I remember thinking, if I'm so right all the time, why does everything around me feel so wrong? That question was like a needle to the balloon of my ego. It deflated me, and thank God it did. Because underneath all that pretending was someone desperate to grow. Someone who was tired of feeling stuck, tired of chasing validation instead of connection. I started reading again, not just to confirm my beliefs, but to challenge them. I listened to people I used to argue with. I asked questions I never would have dared to before. And slowly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace that comes from control, but the kind that comes from humility. From admitting that I don't have it all figured out, and that I don't need to. That letting go of the need to be right is the first step toward becoming real. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." I carried that line with me everywhere. It reminded me that judgment is easy. Listening is hard. Defending yourself is easy. Being changed by truth is hard. But it's the hard things that free us. If you've ever found yourself pushing people away without meaning to, if you've ever felt like you're saying all the right things, but no one's really hearing you, maybe it's worth asking, what am I protecting? Because sometimes the fortress we build to protect ourselves becomes the very thing that isolates us. And freedom starts the moment we stop pretending and start listening. So, here's what I've learned as simply and honestly as I can say it. Being smart means nothing if it keeps you from becoming wise. And wisdom, that begins the second you're willing to say, I don't know, but I'm open to finding out. Your move. There's something deeply seductive about blaming the world for everything that goes wrong in your life. I say that not with judgment, but from experience. I used to be that guy, the one who could explain every failure in his life by pointing outward. The job that didn't work out, unfair boss. The relationship that fell apart, she didn't get me. The dreams that never left the notebook, timing was bad. Or the economy. Or maybe Mercury was in retrograde. It was always something, always someone, never me. And I think, for a while, I actually believed it. That I was just unlucky. That I was trying my best, and life just kept throwing punches. But underneath that story, the one I kept repeating like a mantra, was a quiet, uncomfortable truth I wasn't ready to face. I was avoiding responsibility because I didn't want to feel shame. Taking ownership meant admitting that I could have done better. That I'd made choices, not always out of malice, but out of fear or laziness or pride. And those choices had consequences. It meant confronting the fact that I wasn't a victim of life, but an active participant in my own pain. That realization hurt. But let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. The moment you take responsibility, everything changes. Not because life magically becomes easier, but because you finally remember that you're not powerless. That you're not some leaf being tossed around by fate. You're the one holding the steering wheel. For a long time, though, I didn't want that kind of control. Because if I accepted that the problem was me, then I had to do something about it. And doing something is hard. It's easier to complain, to scroll, to sulk, to find someone else to blame. You know what's crazy? There's even comfort in playing the victim. It buys you sympathy. It excuses inaction. It gives you a story where you don't have to grow, because growing hurts. And no one wants to be the villain in their own story. But there came a moment when I realized the world isn't going to fix itself for me. And even if it did, I'd still find a way to mess it up if I didn't change who I was being. Because wherever you go, you take yourself with you. The mindset, the patterns, the blind spots, they don't disappear just because your zip code or relationship status changes. I remember one specific evening, I was sitting in my car after an argument. The kind that leaves a pit in your stomach. I was angry, of course, at her, at how unfair it all felt. But then, in that silence that follows shouting, I heard something I hadn't let myself hear before. What if it really was my fault? That thought didn't crush me like I feared. Strangely, it was liberating. Because if it was my fault, then maybe it was also within my power to change. And look, I'm not saying you're to blame for everything that happens to you. Life can be brutal, unfair, unpredictable. But if your default setting is always to point fingers, you'll never grow roots. You'll never own your power. And without that ownership, you're just stuck, year after year, telling the same sad story about how the world screwed you over, never realizing the person you're becoming in the process. Carl Jung once asked, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And man, isn't that true? We'll distract, deny, blame, lash out, all to avoid the stillness where we have to admit, I'm messed up. But that stillness, that's where rebirth happens. The truth is, I wasn't failing because the world was out to get me. I was failing because I didn't want to look in the mirror. Because admitting fault felt like weakness. And I was too proud to be seen as weak. But here's what I know now. Real strength isn't about being right all the time. It's not about being unshakable. Real strength is having the guts to say, this one's on me, and I'm going to make it right. So let me ask you something I had to ask myself. And it might sting. Is there a part of your life where you keep playing the victim? A pattern that keeps repeating, and every time it does, you point outward instead of inward? Be honest. Not because I'm judging you, but because you can't heal what you won't own. When you take responsibility, you stop being a character in someone else's story and become the author of your own. That's where your life begins to change, not in massive leaps, but in quiet decisions to stop running from yourself. It's not easy. It's not glamorous. It won't earn you applause, but it will earn you something far more powerful, self-respect. And when you have that, when you truly know you're responsible for your own life. Not just the good parts, but the messy, painful, embarrassing ones too. That's when you start to feel free. That's when the healing begins. There's this moment, maybe you felt it too, when something snaps inside you. You've been holding it in, trying to stay composed, trying to be the bigger person, but then it just breaks. You shout. You slam the door. You say things you don't mean. And in that brief explosion, there's a strange sense of relief, followed by the crushing weight of regret. That was me. Too many times. I used to think it was just part of my personality, that I was passionate or intense, or whatever label made me feel better about losing control. I'd justify it with things like, I just care too much, or they push me too far. And maybe there was a grain of truth in that. But the deeper truth, the one I didn't want to face, was this. I didn't know how to feel without reacting. And that's dangerous, because when your emotions drive the car, you crash. Maybe not every time, maybe not right away, but eventually something important breaks. A relationship, a job, trust. And those things don't always come back. For a long time, I was walking around like a pressure cooker. On the outside, I looked composed. But inside, I was carrying old anger, hidden insecurities, shame I hadn't processed. And when someone touched those wounds, even gently, I exploded. Not always with yelling. Sometimes it was sarcasm. Sometimes silence. Sometimes cutting people out without warning. All because I didn't know what to do with what I felt. No one ever taught me how to handle emotions. Maybe you can relate to that, especially if you grew up hearing phrases like man up, or don't cry, or get over it. You start to believe that emotions are weakness, that expressing them makes you soft. So you bury them. You hold them in until they rot. But emotions don't disappear just because you ignore them. They grow roots. They find new ways to show up in your tone, your habits, your decisions, your relationships. And suddenly, you're reacting to life, not responding to it. One of the hardest truths I've had to learn is this. Feeling something doesn't mean you have to act on it. You can feel anger without lashing out. You can feel hurt without shutting down. You can feel frustration without letting it guide your next move. That's what emotional maturity looks like, not suppressing the emotion, but holding space for it without letting it control you. It took me years to understand that, and a lot of pain. I've burned bridges I wish I could rebuild. I've said things I can't unsay. I've hurt people who didn't deserve it, all because I didn't know how to pause. And let me be clear, this isn't about perfection. It's not about becoming some emotionless monk who never flinches. It's about learning to breathe in the space between the feeling and the action. That space, that 1 second pause, is everything. It's where you reclaim your power. It's where you decide who you are, not just what you feel. I remember reading a study from Yale once. It said that people with low emotional intelligence make impulsive decisions 50% more often under stress. That number hit me hard, because it wasn't just about emotions. It was about how emotions shape our future. One bad decision, made in a burst of rage or fear, can cost you years. So now, when I feel that fire rising in my chest, the urge to shout, to shut down, to run, I try to ask myself, what's really happening here? Not just what did they say, but what did that bring up in me? Is this about now? Or is it about something I've been carrying for years? Because more often than not, the thing that sets us off is just the surface. The real trigger is buried in old pain, old stories, old wounds we never gave ourselves permission to feel. And here's something else I've learned. Strong men aren't the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who stay grounded in the storm. The ones who can hold their center while everything around them tries to shake it loose. The ones who don't need to raise their voice to be heard. Think of someone you truly respect. Is it the guy who flies off the handle? Or the one who speaks with quiet conviction, who listens, who doesn't let his emotions do the talking? Emotional control isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's knowing that your feelings matter, but they aren't always facts, and they don't always deserve the final word. So if you've ever felt like you're too reactive, if you've seen the damage it causes and wondered if it's just who you are, let me tell you, it's not permanent. You're not broken. You're just untrained. And the good news? You can learn. You can train that pause. You can build the muscles of reflection, of patience, of self-awareness. And over time, that storm inside you starts to settle. Because here's the truth. The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs more anchored men. Men who know how to feel deeply without falling apart. Men who can be soft without being weak. Men who can love without losing themselves. I'm still becoming that man. Every day. And I'll be honest, some days I fail. Some days I react when I wish I had paused. But more and more I catch myself. I breathe. I choose differently. And little by little, that changes everything. It took me a long time to realize how much the people around me were shaping who I was, not consciously, not like I was copying them on purpose, but in these subtle, invisible ways. The way they spoke about the world, the way they approached discomfort, the things they celebrated or dismissed. It was like I was inhaling their attitudes without even knowing it. And for a while, I didn't question it. I thought I was just being myself. But what I didn't see was that I had built my reality out of borrowed beliefs. I was surrounded by people who joked about ambition, who rolled their eyes at discipline, who normalized mediocrity and masked it with humor. We laughed about procrastination like it was a lifestyle. We bonded over how unfair everything was, jobs, relationships, politics, but we rarely talked about what we could do about it. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped reaching. I stopped dreaming big. I stopped holding myself to a higher standard. Why? Because no one around me was. And here's the thing no one tells you. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to the level of your environment. That one hit me like a punch to the gut. Because it meant that even if I had big dreams, even if I wanted to grow, I wasn't going to get far if I kept standing in the same room with the same people who only clapped for the version of me that stayed the same. That realization came slowly. First, it was a sense of frustration. I'd feel this fire inside, this hunger to evolve, but it was like trying to run with weights strapped to my ankles. I'd get excited about a project, and someone would say, "Why bother?" I'd talk about new habits, and I'd hear that won't last. I want to try something hard, and someone would remind me of all the reasons it would fail. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were just reflecting what they believed about themselves. And I was letting that shape what I believed about me. That's when it hit me. Sometimes the most dangerous people in your life aren't the ones who attack you. They're the ones who comfort you into staying small. I had to make some hard decisions after that. I had to distance myself from people I cared about. Not because I didn't love them, but because I couldn't keep sacrificing who I wanted to become just to stay connected to who I used to be. And it hurt. Change always does. But here's what I learned. Comfort can be a cage. And the key to that cage is hidden in the people you spend your time with. If they don't challenge you, if they don't inspire you, if they don't call you out when you're slipping, they're not helping you grow. They're helping you settle. Carl Jung once said that we unconsciously absorb the patterns of those closest to us. That idea shook me, because when I looked at the 5 people I spend the most time with, I saw my future. And it scared me. So I started asking different questions. Not just, are they fun? Or do we get along? But do they sharpen me? Do they speak truth? Do they make me better? Because you become what you tolerate. And I was tired of tolerating smallness. That shift in my circle didn't happen overnight. It started with boundaries, then honesty, then space. And eventually, it created room for new people. People who thought deeper, worked harder, dreamed louder. People who weren't afraid to look me in the eye and say, "You're capable of more." And you know what happened? My standards changed. My vision got clearer. My energy stopped getting drained by drama and started being invested in building something real. It's strange how the right people don't just support your growth, they demand it. Not with pressure, but with presence. They show you what's possible just by being who they are. And you start rising, not out of competition, but out of inspiration. So if something in your life feels stuck right now, if you're working hard but not seeing movement, maybe it's not just about what you're doing, but who you're doing it around. Take a look around you. Are these the people who push you higher, or the ones who hold you where you are? It's not an easy question, but your future depends on the answer. Because no matter how disciplined you try to be, if you're surrounded by people who don't want to grow, they will slowly convince you that growth is a myth. And here's the truth. Not everyone gets to go where you're going. And that's okay. Some people were part of your story for a season. But if the next chapter requires a different version of you, stronger, clearer, more courageous, then it also requires a different environment. So be brave enough to walk alone if you have to, because the right people, they'll find you on the path. And when they do, you'll feel it, that sense of alignment, of shared vision, of mutual elevation. That's how you know you're no longer just surviving. You're becoming. You ever notice how easy it is to trade what matters most for what feels good right now? I used to tell myself I was just tired, that I deserved to scroll for a bit, to relax, to indulge. Just 5 more minutes. I'll start tomorrow. 1 more episode, 1 more drink, 1 more snack. It all felt harmless. But over time, those little moments added up. And they weren't taking me closer to the life I wanted. They were pulling me further away. There's something dangerous about comfort when it's constant. It numbs you. You stop noticing that you're drifting. Your dreams don't die with a bang. They fade in the background while you chase short-term pleasure. And that's what I was doing. I wanted discipline. I wanted change. But I wasn't willing to be uncomfortable. I was choosing distraction over direction, ease over effort, and calling it self-care. But it wasn't care. It was avoidance. I think we live in a world that subtly encourages that. Everything's optimized for speed, for dopamine, for keeping us just comfortable enough to never ask if we're really living. You wake up, check your phone, scroll through someone else's life, and before you know it, you've traded your own progress for a pixelated fantasy. That's what hit me one night. I'd spent 2 hours watching videos about people doing things while I sat there, doing nothing, and it wasn't relaxing. It left me feeling empty, restless, annoyed with myself. I kept asking, why am I not moving forward? But the answer was right there, glowing in my hand. The truth? I wasn't willing to be uncomfortable, because real growth is hard. Building something real, a skill, a habit, a better version of yourself, it's slow, it's repetitive, it's boring sometimes, and it doesn't give you the instant gratification that a scroll or a snack or a night out might offer. But here's the thing, that gratification fades, and what you're left with is the quiet ache of potential abandoned. There was a quote I read once that stopped me in my tracks. Discipline is the price you pay for self-respect. And damn, was that true. Every time I skipped the workout, avoided the hard conversation, ignored my to-do list, I felt it. A small cut to how I saw myself. And the more cuts I let happen, the harder it became to look in the mirror. Not because I hated myself, but because I knew I was letting myself down. It's wild, really. Most of us know what we should be doing. We know what would make us stronger, healthier, more fulfilled. But knowing isn't the problem. Doing is. Especially when doing means discomfort. But that's where everything changes. I started experimenting with small shifts. Waking up just 10 minutes earlier. Reaching for a book instead of my phone. Saying no to things that looked good but weren't good for me. And it was hard. Not because the actions were so big, but because they asked me to delay gratification. But the more I practiced, the more I noticed something. Every time I followed through, I felt stronger, clearer, more aligned. It wasn't about perfection. It was about momentum. And each disciplined choice was like a vote for the person I was becoming. Here's something else I've learned. Pleasure feels good in the moment, but discipline feels right in your soul. Because deep down, you know when you're living with intention and when you're just coasting. And if you're anything like me, you've coasted long enough. It's not about hustling 24/7 or turning your life into a checklist. It's about reclaiming your agency, about choosing what serves you, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because there's a version of you, strong, focused, grounded, that's on the other side of discipline. And he's not perfect. He still struggles, still slips, but he gets back up because he remembers why he started. He doesn't chase the high. He builds the foundation. And look, you don't need to overhaul your life in a day. Just pick one thing, one area where you've been choosing comfort over progress. Shine a light on it. Get honest. Ask yourself, what would change if I stopped running from the work? Because the life you want, it's not hiding from you. It's waiting behind the resistance you keep avoiding. And when you start choosing what you need over what you crave, that's when the shift happens. That's when you stop surviving your life and start building it. There's a pain no one talks about. The pain of repeating the same mistakes over and over again and pretending you don't know why. I used to live in that loop. I'd swear to myself that this time will be different. I get all hyped, set a new goal, promise I'd stop reacting the way I always did. I'd journal, plan, even tell people about the new me. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, I'd stay on track. But then the slip, the familiar decision that felt good in the moment but hollow right after. The same argument, the same bad habit, the same pattern, it would all come rushing back like a tide I couldn't stop. And every time, I'd fall into this pit of frustration and shame, thinking, what's wrong with me? And I think the most heartbreaking part of that cycle wasn't the mistake itself. It was the fact that I knew better and still didn't change. It took me a while to understand why that kept happening. And the truth is, it had nothing to do with willpower. It had everything to do with unprocessed pain. I was reacting to life from old wounds, old beliefs, old survival patterns. I wasn't making decisions from clarity. I was playing out a script that had been running in my head since I was a kid. Carl Jung called it unconscious repetition. We keep finding ourselves in the same pain with different people in different circumstances, not because we want to suffer, but because that pain feels familiar. And familiar feels safe, even when it's killing us slowly. You want to know the scariest realization I've ever had? That I was sabotaging myself. Not because I hated myself, but because part of me was still stuck in who I used to be, the version of me that didn't believe he deserved better, the version that thought struggle was normal, that chaos meant passion, that failure was inevitable. And every time I tried to grow, that old version would whisper, "This won't last." That's the voice that ruins us. Quiet, subtle, convincing. It's the reason we break our own hearts and call it fate. The reason we give up right before the breakthrough. The reason we settle, not because we want to, but because some part of us still believes we're not ready for more. But here's what changed everything for me. I stopped judging myself for repeating the cycle, and I started studying it. Instead of beating myself up, I started asking, why did I choose this again? What emotion was I trying to avoid? What did I need in that moment that I ignored? And slowly, I stopped spiraling. I started catching the pattern sooner. Sometimes I'd still slip, but now I understood why. And that understanding gave me power. It gave me options. The truth is, your mistakes aren't proof that you're broken. They're messages, warnings, opportunities to finally face what you've been running from. But here's the catch. You have to stop lying to yourself. No more, "It'll be different this time," if you're not actually changing anything. No more, "I don't know why this keeps happening," when you do know, you're just avoiding the hard work. And definitely no more, "It's just who I am," because you're not a fixed thing. You're a work in progress. But progress doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design, and design takes courage. You have to name the pattern. You have to own your role in it. And then you have to make a different move, even when every part of you wants to fall back into the old one. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. It feels unnatural at first because you've spent years wiring your brain to respond in a certain way. But repetition creates patterns, and new patterns create freedom. One of the most powerful things I ever did was write down my self-sabotage loop. Literally mapped it out. What triggers it? What justifies it? What emotion follows? What damage does it cause? That alone gave me clarity I'd never had before. And clarity is the antidote to shame. Because when you understand yourself, you stop hating yourself. And that's when real change begins. So if you're stuck in a cycle right now, if you keep doing the thing you swore you'd stop, I want you to hear this. You're not weak. You're not hopeless. You're not doomed. You're just unhealed. And healing starts with honesty. Ask yourself, what am I repeating? And what am I avoiding by doing it? Then get quiet. Sit with the answer. Let hurt. And let that hurt guide you. Not into more guilt, but into more awareness. Because here's the truth. Mistakes don't make you a failure. Refusing to learn from them, that's what keeps you stuck. There's this moment, a quiet, invisible one, where something shifts. Not because everything outside of you has changed, but because you finally decide you're done pretending. That's how it started for me. Not with some dramatic revelation or a lightning strike. Just this tiredness. A heaviness I couldn't explain anymore. I was exhausted from my own patterns, my own excuses, tired of hearing myself say, "Tomorrow I'll be better," because the truth was, tomorrow always came, and I stayed the same. That kind of fatigue is different. It's not physical, it's spiritual. It's the weight of knowing there's more to you than what you're living, and watching yourself ignore it every single day. One night, I sat alone, thinking about everything I blamed. The system, my childhood, that one breakup, that boss, that season of bad luck. And then, in the quiet, something inside whispered, "What if it's been you?" And man, that broke me, but also freed me. Because for the first time, I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't at the mercy of life. I was the one holding the pen. I just didn't like what I'd been writing. That night, I made a choice. A small, private one. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I just promised myself that I'd stop outsourcing my future to old pain and bad habits. I wrote down 3 words. Own. The pattern. Not fight it. Not shame it. Own it. And that choice, that single moment of self-responsibility, shifted everything. Here's what I've learned. Growth doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with honesty. And sometimes the most honest thing you can say is, "I'm the one who's been in my way." So I started small. I chose one behavior, just one, that I knew was wrecking me. Something I'd repeated so many times it had become part of my identity. For me, it was numbing out every night with meaningless distractions. I told myself it helped me unwind, but really, it was just my way of not facing the parts of me I didn't want to feel. I didn't try to be perfect. I just started asking, what would I do right now if I actually respected myself? That question became my anchor. And sometimes the answer was simple. Turn off the phone. Go for a walk. Text someone I'd been avoiding. Say no. Say yes. Apologize. Breathe. Be still. And each time I followed through, it was like I reclaimed a piece of myself. That's how healing works. Not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of self-alignment. You start to trust yourself again. You start to feel like someone worth becoming. And then something even deeper happens. You begin to forgive the version of you that didn't know better. The one who stayed stuck, who hurt people, who hurt themselves. You stop carrying them like a weight and start honoring them as a stepping stone. You realize they weren't weak. They were just scared. And you're no longer that scared. You're ready now. Because when you stop lying to yourself, when you look at your life and say, "This is on me, and I'm ready to change it," that's when the real journey begins. You don't need more inspiration. You need action. You need a moment where you stop collecting advice and start making decisions. Where you stop analyzing and start practicing. Where you stop blaming and start building. So here's your invitation, not from some guru or coach or stranger on the internet, but from someone who's been there. Pick one pattern, one excuse, one behavior you know has been costing you too much. Write it down, stare at it, and say, "I'm not letting this lead my life anymore." Then make a move, even if it's small, especially if it's small, because that first honest step, it's not just movement, it's momentum, and it's yours. Some truths don't hit you all at once. They arrive slowly, in pieces. A quiet realization here, a painful conversation there, a moment of stillness that finally lands after years of noise. That's what the last part of my journey felt like. Not an explosion. More like the final key turning in a lock I didn't know I'd been holding all along. Because after everything, the ego, the excuses, the emotional chaos, the wasted time, the toxic circles, I still had to face the hardest thing of all. Some men never wake up, and I could have been one of them. There's something terrifying about the idea that you can live your whole life asleep. Emotionally numb, spiritually blind, mentally stuck, repeating the same cycles until your last breath. Never really growing, never really healing. Just getting older, harder, angrier. And then one day it's over, and the life you could have lived never happened. I've met those men. You probably have, too. They look fine from the outside, maybe even successful. But there's a hollowness in their voice, a defensiveness in their tone. They don't listen anymore. They don't ask questions. They don't change. Because deep down, they gave up on the idea that change was even possible. They became a character in a story they stopped writing years ago. And that scared me, deeply, because I saw parts of myself in them. So I asked myself the question that I think every man has to ask if he wants to be free. Am I actually learning from my pain or just living in it? That question is a mirror, a brutal one, because if you're honest, you start to see all the moments where life tried to teach you something and you ignored it, where your failure wasn't the tragedy, your refusal to grow from it was. And look, I get it. Growth is uncomfortable. It's slow. It's humiliating sometimes. But so is staying stuck. So is pretending you're fine when you're quietly breaking. So is watching time pass while you do nothing different and expect your life to somehow change. We don't talk enough about the cost of not growing, but you feel it in your relationships, in your energy, in that low-grade resentment that never seems to go away, in the way you talk to yourself when no one else is around. That's the cost, and it's high. So here's what I did, what I still do. I treat every mistake as a signal, not a sign that I'm a failure, but a flare. Hey, there's something here you haven't faced yet. Instead of hiding from it, I study it. I ask, where did I ignore myself? What am I pretending not to see? And then I do the hardest part. I change my behavior. Not just my mindset, not just my language, my behavior, because that's what breaks the cycle. Not insight, not understanding, action. It's easy to say, I'll do better. Harder to actually pause when you feel triggered. Harder to apologize when your ego's screaming not to. Harder to step away from that toxic relationship. To shut down the distraction. To speak the truth. To get up earlier. To try again when you already failed 5 times. But that's what makes you different. That's what separates the man who evolves from the one who repeats. And here's the thing no one tells you. You won't feel ready. You won't feel like doing it. And it won't be perfect. Do it anyway. Because every time you do, you rewrite the script. You break the illusion. You prove to yourself that you're not just a product of your past. You're the author of your future. And that's the moment it all starts to shift. When you realize the life you want isn't found in some distant breakthrough. It's built in quiet, daily choices. The choice to wake up, to stop lying, to stop waiting, to stop repeating, to become the kind of man you respect. Not in theory, but in practice. So if you've made it this far, let me leave you with this. You're not stuck because you're broken. You're stuck because you keep trying to grow without letting go. Let go of the story that says you can't change. Let go of the shame. Let go of the identity you built around your pain. And step into the discomfort of becoming someone new. Not for the world. Not for applause. For you. Because the version of you who doesn't evolve, he's waiting too. In a quiet corner of the life you never wanted. And you don't have to be him. Not anymore. If this felt meaningful to you, it might mean something to someone else too. So hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. That's how YouTube knows to share it with others. Maybe together, we can help someone see things a little differently.